I am really excited to have Luna Medina-Wolf here today to talk to our basic trainees about working with addictions. It's an area that I have worked with a few people to help them stop vaping or maybe working with some food addictions, but overall, addictions is not my wheelhouse. So I wanted to reach out to the experts, and Luna is a person that I have grown to follow her journey in EMDR and as a consultant, and then now she's actually helping out with basic trainings. So Luna, introduce yourself and your journey with working with addictions, and then we'll talk about how the people who are learning EMDR therapy, how they can begin to listen with an ear for addictions and EMDR.
Thank you for having me, Sandra. And this is really exciting. I welcome all of you to the EMDR therapist community. It's a wonderful community of people who are really dedicated to promote healing with trauma. My background, I'm a licensed mental health counselor and a master certified addiction counselor. I am located in South Florida. I own a group practice called Helping Moon Counseling. And I actually started in the substance use industry by chance because I lost my practicum when I was in grad school to where I was supposed to go because of some changes they have done, and I had to find something quickly. So my friend said, "Oh, come here," and it's the last thing I wanted to do, but I did, and it's like how life takes you to where you're supposed to get to. So I started working in a partial hospitalization setting, a PHP setting, and I was there through my practicum, advanced practicum, internship, and ended up really falling in love because what I wanted is to work with trauma. And anybody who works with addiction knows that at the end of the day, addiction is very linked to trauma. Even the journey of getting sober, there's some trauma that goes with that. So I worked in the substance use industry for about 7 years as a therapist in partial hospitalization, an intensive outpatient, and then I also became a clinical director at some point, and then eventually I decided to open my private practice, and I continued working with substance use diagnosis with my clients since then in my private practice, and about 12 years now. And I love working with addiction and especially with EMDR. So I'll tell you more about that as we continue with our conversation.
Wonderful. We have a really great person in front of us, class. I'm excited about this and learning more about how to incorporate EMDR with addictions. So when a client comes to you, or even when you were working in an agency and you're doing phase 1 intake with them, history taking, are there certain things you look for from an addiction standpoint? Are there certain questions you ask? How do you handle that phase 1 information gathering?
So in general, I would say in most cases, because the cases in substance use, when you work in an agency in a substance use facility, will most likely be more complex, right? Because of the component of the addiction, then I tend to actually switch the phases a little bit. I tend to start with phase 2 with most clients because you do get, there's a huge biopsychosocial that you do in addictions because you have to do that for the, billing purposes and so forth. So you get a lot of information. You get like the basic information in a lot of detail. So it gives you an idea. So with that, you kind of want to make sure they're stable enough to start exploring some of it. Even though phase 1 doesn't require a lot of details, it's still kind of like safer to start with phase 2 in most cases. Of course, every case is a case by itself, but for the most part, I kind of want to make sure, okay, do they even have a capacity to regulate, especially as they're basically detoxing and possibly having post-acute withdrawal symptoms. So you want to pay attention to those signs.
Wonderful. So it sounds like that when you get their intake paperwork and you're looking at their history there, your clinician's mind is saying, when they walk in the door and I greet them and I meet them, do our pleasantries, but what I'm going to focus on is state change.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's the first thing I do. Not always, but when I look at the intake, I look through the AIP model. I look for those signs for any negative cognitions and the underlying core issues that I'm noticing based on just those intake paperwork. And if I see that, I want to make sure they're able to stay changed. So I kind of like, like you said, the pleasantries. And then I'll say, I see that there's some things that we can work on from the EMDR lens as far as your trauma history. But I would like for us to try some exercises to see how are you able to regulate when you get triggered, when you become dysregulated in a group session or at this resident or at an AA meeting, because they're constantly exposing things anyway in their 8-hour days.
That is so true. And do you start with the 4 elements? Do you start with the calm place and a container? Do you mix it up? How do you begin even with the phase 2?
So I start with calm state with the most clients. I do different variations of calm state from different modalities and scripts that I use. Sometimes it doesn't really work for everybody, so I would use a container as well. Container works really, really well. I used to, when I worked in substance use, I used to have, in Michael's and other Archer places, they used to have empty containers, like wood that they can color too. So I used to have that in my office. If anybody wanted to have like a physical container, they can grab one and they can, just make it pretty for themselves. And then we can have physical containers or just the exercise of containers. I do a lot of breathing techniques. I even sometimes teach the tapping, the slow tapping to just regulate. I used to have the buzzers in my office, so I used to do that. Again, with, paying attention to how they're responding to it, but definitely utilize that. I love ego state therapy, and it works really well with addictions, just working with the state of the part of yourself that used to use, and everything that happened to you during the coping skills that you used. What was that part of yourself? And I do a lot of ego state work. It works really well with substance use.
Wonderful. Can you give an example, without mentioning any clients by name, but can you give an example of where you use some ego state with the part that you used to use? That's very intriguing to me.
Yeah, definitely. So an example would be a client who shares that they started drinking at the age of 13 because their parents were getting a divorce, and they found a place where their parents were hiding the alcohol, and we would just kind of say, okay, can you share with me what was happening at that time in your life when your parents got divorced? And then they'll say, oh, they were fighting all the time. And what I just like to say is, if it's okay, would you be okay with us just exploring how did you feel at that age when you were experiencing this? And for a lot of clients, I find that they like to close their eyes, but I don't ask for that. But I say, if you want to, you can close your eyes. And I just kind of try to connect to that part of yourself at that age and tell me what you're feeling and what are you experiencing at this moment. And they just at this point are going to close their eyes or just going to share, I see myself at the age of 13, my parents are fighting in the kitchen. If needed, you can enhance and kind of say, okay, can you see how you look? How do you look? What are you wearing? Right? If you need to enhance for them, but a lot of clients will have already, right, the flood of information. Okay, what are you hearing? What are you feeling at this time? Is there anything that child needed at that point to help them deal with what was going on? Because at that point, they normally say, okay, I'm actually going to my parents' bedroom. My dad used to hide, I'm thinking about a particular client, my dad used to hide, those little bottles in his nightstands. So I went there quickly and I just drank because I heard that that's what my father was saying. Like, I just drink because it makes me feel better. So the child went to try to make themselves feel better at that point. And I say, okay, so at that moment you went to your father's bedroom and you took the bottle and you were drinking. Okay, is there anything else that we can think about now that would have helped this child? And then we just do a little bit of a conversation between the adult self and, just a little bit more of an ego state. I don't want to take too much time talking about ego states.
It's fascinating, though. And are you running any pulsars at this time? Is this something that you do without pulsars? Could you talk a little bit about that piece?
Yeah, so sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. It's really case by case. I think that the pulsars, when they're slow, when a client is having an intense reaction, right, we know that the bilateral stimulation just helps them land a little bit and feel a
Right.
little bit more grounded. So in many cases I do, especially with the pulsars, because you can just put them in your pocket, just put them in your pocket. I introduce a lot of clients quickly in the process to just see if they feel okay with it.
Yeah.
On rare occasions, clients could actually get dysregulated, we know, right, from bilateral. So I do it very carefully. And then if they do like it, then it just helps them go through the information a little bit easier. And
Yeah.
that becomes very helpful.
Wonderful. And as you look through, they're learning now about the AIP model, the AIP
Mm-hmm.
lens, that ability for the brain to heal itself. What are you looking for concerning targets from? If a client comes in, do you start with the present because they're coming in distress? They want help, maybe with their drinking or their drug use, or maybe with something else, and that's a part of it. Are you going back to the past and where do you start with someone who has an addiction?
Yeah, so I want to just for a moment quickly say something again about phase two, and then I'll jump into what you were asking. I want to make sure to just remind everybody that some clients are going to come in already with some tools that they do have that are positive, that got them there too. So it's important to build on those. So during phase two, I also kind of like help figure out what has worked for them, what is some grounding skills that they're already using. Do they like visualization? They don't. Do they do body movement? Anything that works for them already, like we like to build upon that. And then once we have that, and I feel like the client is able to regulate inside of session and outside of session, then I will go into target selection. Now, I would say most of the time, partial hospitalization, PHP, insurance covers about 30 to 45 days. Right? So 30 to 45 days, you might not get to do any reprocessing. You might only get to do phase 1 and 2, and maybe just preparation for that reprocessing, right? Target selection and moving forward to reprocessing in 4. And you'll just create this foundation for them to take it to an outpatient therapy after that,
I
okay?
am so thankful you said that, because that was something I had in the back of my mind. So I'm thankful you said that, because we do have people who are working in agencies and short term, and there's always the question, how do I do EMDR with this person? And it settles on phases 1 and 2, preparing them for going out and then looking for an EMDR therapist.
Yeah, and that's super important. Like I used to have a list of people that I knew that offer EMDR outside of our agency, and I even helped clients like schedule an appointment, either me or the case manager. That's where they can use most places nowadays. They have like case managers or aftercare managers that can help with finding an EMDR therapist for the client. So whatever you did, and I kind of send them with like a packet of what we did, the resource, or a set, like you can have the place you went to. Sign a release, and I'll release whatever they need. So this way you're not starting from scratch, and they can kind of like continue the work.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So as far as the target selection, right? So from the AIP model, we're kind of like looking for those early memories that shape that adult behavior, right? Whatever was maladaptively stored and created those negative core beliefs, or the negative beliefs about yourself. So we want to kind of like create that foundation for what would be the best target to start with, right? Normally we say we want to go to the earliest or the worst, right? Those are the memories we aim for, those touchstone memories. In addiction, you might not want to start there because that might be way too packed to start. So you might start with something a little bit less severe to just help the client have some work done, some reprocessing done, and then kind of like creating those connection between the memory network, right, to adaptive memory network versus the maladaptive. We might even want to start with a present trigger. And let's say the client says, Luna, every time we go to a meeting and somebody shares about using, and I hear the word heroin, something happens to me. I feel it in my body. And I might take that and I'll say, okay, let's just do this present trigger of the word heroin, and let's do the protocol for a present trigger and a future template. I had a client once who said that when they go to do their laundry, the laundry detergent they use at the facility he was at reminds him of when he smoked crack. He's like, I don't know why, but something about that reminds me the moment I lit my crack pipe. And every time I go to do laundry, I get really really worked up. And we did that. We did a present trigger for the smell of the laundry detergent, and we did a present trigger and a future template. He came back. I get chills when I talk about it because I know now I actually know this person is clean and sober today, which is exciting to sometimes get those moments of connection with people years later to know they're sober. And he came back the next day and he said, I don't know what you did, but it didn't trigger me. I need laundry. It's like it was magic. And I say, it
It's
wasn't magic, it was
magical.
just your brain, right? It is magical, but yeah, it's your
Yes.
brain did the work and it was
Yes.
phenomenal.
And so with that future template, you would have had him imagine going to that laundromat, the
Yeah.
worst part where he's most got that angst, set it up in a phase 3 assessment
Yeah.
and set him up for success.
Yeah, and it worked so beautifully. And it really helped him to be able to continue because when you think about addictions, right, if you think about it from the AIP model and from EMDR, right, we talk about the image, the feelings, the smells,
Thoughts.
right, all the body sensations, right, all those.
Yeah.
There's so much more when it comes to addiction because it just layers and layers of all the trauma and layers of triggers that
Yes.
they have them all around them all the
Yes.
time,
That is
right?
so true. That is so true. Okay, so now I'm curious, how do you know when to treat someone? Like when is the best time to treat someone, especially if they've come into an agency maybe to get sober? How do you decide when is the best time to do EMDR therapy with them? And let's say even in private practice where there's not that 30, 45-day window.
hmm
So give us an idea of how to handle a client with treating them phases 3 to 7.
Yeah, I always kind of like to remind, especially people in basic training, which I'm sure you do too, is that when you do phase 1 and 2, you're doing EMDR already, right? So some
Yes.
clients are going to come and they're going to say, when are you going to do EMDR with me?
Uh-huh.
You're going to do this
We're
thing with the
doing it.
eyes, right? So we are doing it when we do phases 1 and 2. We're just not
Just,
doing reprocessing,
okay, I
right?
just got to say you're a soul sister right now with that.
Yeah, I always gotta remind this to people. So, right, so at this point, but if I want to do reprocessing, right, and we don't do phase 3 unless we have enough time to do phase 4, right, because they go together.
Right.
So at this point, if I'm in an agency and I know the client is going to stay with me because you can do that, right? When you go to PHP, a lot of facilities will have inpatient inside, right? So they go from PHP to IOP. They'll continue seeing you. So if you know you're going to have that 60, 90, 120 days, then you can kind of like prepare them for the next phase. And even though they're in IOP, if you have enough stabilization, you prepare them really well, you can see they're able to stay trained in and outside of session, then you can move forward to do reprocessing. You can start with your target selection and start doing phases 4 through 6 to reprocess memories. And I've done that because in the facilities I worked with, in every place I worked at, thankfully we had both PHP and IOP, which is mostly what you're going to see. So they were able to kind of like transition from seeing me in PHP to transitioning to seeing me in IOP, and then I continued just working with them. And then once they completed, the facilities in some places would even allow them to continue outpatient and come back to see you. So sometimes I got to see people for 6 to 9 months in an inpatient setting. So it really depends on where you work, and you have to just pay attention. I think that in general, right, no matter where you work at, if it's a substance use facility, private practice, or an agency, you always have to pay attention as part of your informed consent of how long are you going to have the client for? Do they have the ability to pay? Are they able to come consistently? How committed are they to doing it, right? That is definitely one of the signs that we want to pay attention to. If the client, even though they can see you weekly, doesn't show up to their weekly session, do you really want to open up something?
Right.
Probably not.
Mhm. No. And also, do they have a support system? I think is really important.
100%.
Really important.
Yes.
Do you,
Actually,
let
let
me
me
ask,
say one more thing. Can I say one
yes.
more thing? Because one of the things you asked me when we chatted is like, do we need to wait for them to be clean and sober? Absolutely not. Okay, that I'm going to say right away
Okay.
because um, they need, in my opinion, like a passion of mine. One day I might go back to grad school and do a PhD because a passion of mine is to do some research as far as the correlation between doing EMDR and really reprocessing trauma in the ability for clients to stay sober. Because what happens is when people do let's say they start to get clean, right? They go to AA meetings or whatever sober support type of group they join. Let's say they start doing the 12 steps. The 12 steps are super triggering, especially for, step 4. It's all about really exposing some of those things that happened in your addiction journey. It's a lot. A lot of people relapse in that phase. So if you're able to do, and I've done that a lot, I worked alongside with sponsors. I signed release of information with sponsors. I told them, let me know whenever you start step 4 with your client, with your sponsees. And then I supported them through that, and just being able to work on the trauma as they were working on their steps, help them get through their steps without relapsing. So I do think that EMDR can help people get sober and stay sober, versus if they wait to stay sober, sometimes it's too late to start, because then let's say they're out in the world already, they're not in treatment, and then something triggers them, they quickly go into what we know, right, the secondary conditioning, or their whatever coping skill they used when they got when they were using, they're going to use the same coping skill. So you want to explore that and kind of like relieve that before that gets to that point.
That is wonderful information, Luna. Thank you for that. And I want to ask you, and I did not ask you this when we were discussing, and this is just about insurance billing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know the code that they would use for billing insurance for working with EMDR, and any add-on if they're using equipment? Are you familiar with that? And if not, that's okay.
So when they're inpatient, they bill for the day. That's the way it works. At PHP level of care, the facility bills for the day. So the therapist does have the option to see the client for a longer time if they need, because it doesn't really matter. It doesn't bill for specifically. I know some facilities may even bill in addition for if they have like an EMDR outside therapist or something, they do. I'm not familiar with that because a lot has changed in the billing since I went to private practice. In our private practice setting as an insurance provider, unfortunately, years ago they allowed an add-on. Nowadays they don't, sadly, right? So you can just use a regular session. And then if a client needs really longer time, you might see them like twice a week instead, right? Because you won't be able to do a longer session. Or, some of my providers, and including myself, I've done like, okay, I'll bill for, the 55 minutes, and then I'll see you for additional 30 minutes for free. But I want to say this to people who are in private practice and see insurance. You can do a lot in just that 55 minutes window. You just have to be mindful of the time, right? Just paying attention that you're not chit-chatting too much. I say to my consultees something that my mentor said to me in my journey. When you do EMDR, it's almost like taking your therapist hat, putting it aside for a moment, and putting on an EMDR therapist hat, right? To just minimize some of that chit-chatting, because you help your client more when you're doing EMDR protocol versus just like the check-in, and then you can spend about 15 to 20 minutes easy, right, on checking.
Right.
None of that when you're in the process of doing reprocessing.
And speaking of that, you mentioned the word protocol. Are there any other protocols that you use other than the basic protocol, the standard protocol, which I love? I feel like it handles so many of the issues that we encounter, but I'm curious if you use any other protocols.
Yeah, so I'm just like you. The basic protocol can basically work on anything and everything. I tend to just go to the basic protocol, and just that's my way of handling most things. On rare occasions, I would use other protocols, specifically with addiction. There's the detour protocol. I've used it many times. I wouldn't say that I would use it in the purpose of even complete abstinence. It's not necessarily the goal. It's more of like from a harm reduction perspective. So you might not get a person to fully remain abstinent because of the protocol, but it would help them through dealing with the triggers they're dealing with. So using that protocol has been helpful when I worked in addiction.
Okay. And is there anything else that you haven't said that you think, oh, wait, there's another tip I want to give that would help therapists who work with addictions?
I think that really the most important thing is that something you mentioned before, which is making sure that they're able to stay changed and making sure that they have a good support system, because doing EMDR can increase, emotional dysregulation. So we want to make sure that they have all the tools around them internal resources, external resources in order to support them through this process, because it could be very challenging. But then I know that the clients of mine that I have done EMDR with in the addiction world, I literally can say most of them remain sober. So that's why I'm like, I want to do research about this, because I want to show how
Yes.
those two modality, working with this modality can help people stay sober. So I think that's something that I want people to stay with.
Beautiful. Well, I cannot thank you enough for spending time with us today and sharing your expertise. This is more than I even imagined. It was very informative. I love your passion for EMDR and for working with your clients. Could you give us your contact information? Talk a little bit. I mean, I know you're a consultant and you're also working with basic trainings as well. But how could they contact you if they had more questions? They wanted to get an hour with you for consultation. Uh, what is your contact information?
Sure. Like I said, my company is Helping Moon Counseling. So if anybody goes to my website, www.helpingmoon.com, that's one way to contact me. But the easiest way would be to just email me, luna@helpingmoon.com. I offer group consultation once a month. I offer individual consultation. I also have a peer-to-peer group that meets monthly for free. And I'm always happy to help people, especially when it relates to EMDR, and just help with questions, anything that I can do to support.
Thank you so much again.
Thank
Really
you for having me.
wonderful. Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you.